The heater in the rental car had died 3 hours ago. Now, the frost was creeping up the inside of the glass, forming a white tomb around Sophia. Her fingers were so numb she couldn't even grip the steering wheel anymore. The Wyoming wind howled like a dying wolf, shaking the metal frame of the car. She closed her eyes, accepting that she would never see the New York skyline again. But then, a shadow blocked the wind, a heavy thud against the door. She looked up, her vision blurring, and saw a massive black horse looming in the whiteout, and on its back, a man who looked like he was carved from the mountain itself. The silence of the Wyoming high country is different from the silence anywhere else on Earth. It is not empty. It is heavy. It presses against your eardrums and sinks into your bones. For Sophia, a woman whose life was measured in the frantic ticking of clocks and the relentless noise of New York City construction sites, this silence was terrifying. She had made a mistake, a calculation error. In her world of blueprints and steel girders, errors could be fixed with an eraser or a change order. But out here, on a forgotten service road, 40 miles from civilization, errors had a cost. The GPS had promised her a shortcut to Jackson Hole. It had promised to shave 2 hours off her drive, so she could make the morning meeting with the investors. But the GPS didn't know about the weather in the Tetons. It didn't know that the sky could turn from a bruised purple to a blinding violent white in the span of 20 minutes. Now, her sleek, rented SUV was buried halfway up its tires in a drift that felt like concrete. The engine was dead. The heat was gone. Sophia sat perfectly still, her designer coat offering little protection against the sub-zero bite that was gnawing at her toes. She checked her phone for the 100th time. No signal, just the mocking words, no service, glowing in the dim light. She let out a breath, and it crystallized instantly in front of her face. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in her chest. She realized, with a clarity that was more painful than the cold, that she might actually die here. Not in a hospital, not old and gray, but here, frozen in a rental car because she was too impatient to take the long way around. The wind picked up, screaming across the plains, rocking the car. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of her apartment in Manhattan, the warm yellow light of her desk lamp, the smell of the coffee shop on the corner. It all seemed like a dream from a different lifetime. She didn't hear the horse at first. The wind was too loud. She didn't hear the crunch of hooves on ice. The first sign that she wasn't alone was the sudden shadow that fell over the driver's side window. It blocked the swirling snow. Sophia gasped, her eyes flying open. A shape, massive and dark. Someone banged on the glass with a gloved fist. The sound was dull, muffled by the ice, but it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She fumbled with the door handle, her frozen fingers clumsy and useless. It wouldn't budge. The ice had sealed it shut. The figure outside shouted something, but the wind stole the words. Then the door was wrenched open from the outside with a groan of protesting metal and snapping ice. The wind rushed in, stealing the last bit of trapped heat, but Sophia didn't care. Standing there, wrapped in a heavy canvas duster coat, his hat pulled low against the storm, was a man. He looked like part of the landscape rough, weathered and unyielding. He didn't smile. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply reached in, unbuckled her seatbelt with efficient, gloved hands, and looked at her with eyes the color of slate. "You can't stay here," he said. His voice was deep, a rumble that vibrated in her chest. It wasn't a suggestion. "Unless you want to be a statue by morning," Sophia tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too violently. She tried to move her legs to step out, but they refused to obey. The man seemed to realize her state instantly. He didn't wait for her to try again. He leaned in, scooped her up into his arms as if she were a bag of feed. and turned away from the car. He carried her through the knee-deep snow toward a large black horse that stood stoically in the blizzard. The horse snorted, a plume of steam erupting from its nostrils, but it didn't flinch as the man lifted Sophia up. "Hold the horn," he commanded, placing her hands on the saddle horn. He swung himself up behind her, his large frame acting as a shield against the biting wind. He reached around her to grab the reins, and for a moment Sophia felt completely surrounded by him by the smell of leather, wood smoke, and wet wool. "Hang on," he said near her ear. "It's not far." The ride was a blur of white and gray. Sophia drifted in and out of consciousness, the cold making her sleepy, which she knew was dangerous, but the warmth radiating from the man behind her kept pulling her back. He was solid. He was warm. He was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. She didn't know how much time passed before the vague outline of a cabin appeared through the snow. It was a low structure made of heavy logs, smoke pouring defiantly from a stone chimney. The horse stopped, and the man slid down, reaching up to pull her into his arms again. He kicked the door open, and they were hit with a wall of heat. The smell of burning pine and sage filled Sophia's nose, stinging her eyes. He carried her to a worn leather armchair near the massive stone fireplace and set her down gently. "Stay," he ordered. He moved with a frantic efficiency now. He stripped off his heavy coat, revealing a flannel shirt and broad shoulders. He grabbed a thick wool blanket from the back of the sofa and wrapped it around her, tucking it in tight. Then he knelt before the fire, throwing on another log and stoking the embers until flames roared to life, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Sophia watched him, shivering uncontrollably as the blood began to return to her extremities. It was a painful, prickling sensation, like 1,000 needles. The man disappeared into a small kitchen area and returned a moment later with a steaming mug. "Drink," he said, pressing it into her hands. "It's broth. Don't gulp it." She took a sip. It was salty and hot, and it tasted like life itself. As the warmth spread through her chest, her shivering began to subside. She looked up at him. He was leaning against the mantel, watching her with an unreadable expression. He had a strong jaw, covered in a few days of dark stubble, and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow. He was handsome, in a terrifying, rugged way. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I thought I was dead." "You almost were," he said bluntly. "What were you doing on the service road? Locals don't even take that pass in January. My GPS. ... Double quote, Sophia started, feeling foolish. It said it was a shortcut. He let out a short, dry laugh, shaking his head. "GPS? That machine doesn't know this mountain. The mountain doesn't care about your schedule." "Lady, Sophia," she said. "My name is Sophia." He looked at her for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. Wyatt, that was it. No last name. No pleasantries. Just Wyatt. For the next 2 days, the storm raged outside. The windows were buried in snow, turning the cabin into a cozy, isolated capsule out of time. Sophia, the woman who usually ran a team of 20 architects and billed by the hour, found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. Nothing. She sat by the fire. She watched the flames. She watched Wyatt. Wyatt was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He took care of her with a gruff, reluctant tenderness. He cooked simple, hearty meal stews, biscuits, heavy oatmeal. He checked on the horses in the barn, battling the wind to run a rope line so he could find his way back. Sophia began to feel like an intruder in his solitary life. The cabin was clearly a bachelor's sanctuary. There were no pictures on the walls, no feminine touches, just books, maps, and tools. "Do you live here alone?" she asked on the second evening. The wind was howling down the chimney, making the fire pop and hiss. Wyatt was oiling a bridle at the kitchen table. He didn't look up. "Yep. Don't you get lonely?" He paused, the rag still in his hand. He looked around the cabin, as if seeing it for the first time. Peace and quiet isn't the same thing as loneliness. Sophia, in the city. Surrounded by 1,000,000 people. That's where I felt lonely. Sophia fell silent. She thought about her life in New York. The cocktail parties, the gallery openings, the crowded subways. It was right. She was always surrounded by people, yet she couldn't remember the last time she had a conversation that wasn't about work or networking. I build skyscrapers, she said softly. I design spaces for thousands of people to live and work. But I live alone in a glass box on the 40th floor. Wyatt looked at her then, really looked at her. His gaze softened. Sounds cold. It is, she admitted. The dynamic between them began to shift. The initial wariness faded, replaced by a curiosity, a tension that hummed in the small space. Sophia wanted to show him she wasn't just a helpless city girl. When he went out to feed the horses the next morning, she insisted on coming. You don't have boots, he argued. I'll wear an extra pair of your socks, she countered. He sighed, but he let her come. Wearing his oversized coat and socks wrapped in plastic bags inside her ruined boots, she tramped through the waist-deep snow to the barn. It was hard work. Throwing hay bales, breaking the ice on the water troughs, her muscles burned, and her breath burned in her lungs. But she didn't complain. She worked alongside him, matching his rhythm. When they finished, they stood in the barn, the warm, sweet smell of hay and horses surrounding them. Wyatt leaned on a pitchfork, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. He looked at her, her cheeks flushed red, her hair a mess, wearing his giant coat. You did good, he said. It was simple praise, but coming from him, it felt like winning an award. I'm tougher than I look, she said, smiling. Wyatt took a step closer. The air in the barn suddenly felt very thin. He reached out, his rough hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His fingers lingered on her cheek. The leather of his glove was cold, but his touch burned. Sophia's breath hitched. She looked up at his lips. They were chapped, serious. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted it more than she had ever wanted to sign a contract or win a bid. He leaned in, his eyes searching hers. The distance between them closed 2 inches. Sophia closed her eyes, tilting her head up. A loud crash from the back of the barn made them jump apart. One of the horses had kicked its stall door. The moment shattered like thin ice. Wyatt cleared his throat, stepping back, pulling his hat down. We should get back. Storms breaking. He turned and walked out. Sophia stood there for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs, feeling the loss of his warmth. That night, the wind died down. The silence returned, but now it felt peaceful, not heavy. The sky cleared, revealing a canopy of stars so bright and dense it looked like spilled milk. The next morning, the sound of an engine broke the peace. A snowplow. The county was clearing the roads. Sophia stood at the window, watching the yellow machine churn up the road in the distance. It was her ticket out. It was freedom. It was exactly what she had wanted 3 days ago. So why did she feel like crying? Wyatt came up behind her. Road crew made it through. I can drive you into town. Get you a tow truck for your car. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He had put his walls back up. The moment in the barn might as well have never happened. Right? Sophia said, turning to face him. She tried to keep her voice steady. I need to get back. My firm? They're probably panicked. Best you get back to your skyscrapers, Wyatt said. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was busy packing a bag with water and supplies for the truck. The drive to town was agonizingly quiet. The landscape was blindingly beautiful, sparkling under the sun, but neither of them commented on it. When they reached the small town of Dubois, Wyatt pulled up to the only mechanic's shop. He waited while she arranged for her car to be towed and fixed. Then He drove her to a small motel where she could wait for the repairs. He carried her bag to the door of the room. This was it. Say goodbye. Thank you, Wyatt, Sophia said, standing on the motel walkway. For saving my life. For everything. He nodded, looking past her at the highway. Take care of yourself, Sophia. Don't take any more shortcuts. I won't, she promised. She hesitated. Wyatt, ... about the other day. In the barn, ... You're a city girl, Sophia. He cut her off, his voice gentle but firm. You belong there. I belong This, he gestured to the mountains. This is too quiet for you. You'd go crazy in a month. You don't know that, she argued weakly. I do, he said. He looked at her one last time, memorizing her face. Goodbye, Sophia. He turned, walked to his truck, and drove away without looking back. Sophia watched his taillights disappear around the bend, feeling a hollowness in her chest that she knew no amount of city noise could fill. 2 months later, New York City. It was raining. A cold, gray, miserable rain that turned the city streets into rivers of slush and trash. Sophia sat in a boardroom on the 52nd floor, overlooking the foggy expanse of Manhattan. The senior partners were arguing about the facade of the new tech hub they were designing. They were screaming about glass opacity and steel grades. ... Sophia. Sophia, do you agree? She blinked, snapping back to reality. I'm sorry. What? The glass, the partner said, annoyed. It needs to be reflective. Sophia looked at the blueprints. Lines. Just lines on paper, cold, sterile. It doesn't matter, she said quietly. The room went silent. Excuse me, it doesn't matter, she said, louder this time. She stood up. None of this matters. It's just a building. It's just a glass box. She walked to the window. She couldn't see the horizon, just more buildings. More noise. She thought of the silence of the cabin. She thought of the smell of sage. She thought of Wyatt's hand on her cheek. She realized Wyatt was wrong. She hadn't gone crazy in the quiet. She was going crazy here, in the noise. She was building cages for people, and she was living in one herself. She turned back to the room of stunned men in suits. I quit. The drive back to Wyoming took 3 days. Sophia didn't fly. She wanted to drive. She wanted to see the landscape change, to feel the distance closing. It was early spring now. The snow was melting, feeding rushing rivers. The world was waking up. She didn't use a GPS this time. She remembered the way. She turned onto the service road. It was muddy, but passable. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. What if he wasn't there? What if he turned her away? What if he had been right, and she was just chasing a fantasy? She pulled up to the cabin. Smoke was rising from the chimney. The black horse was in the corral. Sophia got out of her car, her own car this time, an SUV she had bought specifically for this terrain. She took a deep breath. The air tasted like pine and wet earth. It tasted like home. She walked to the barn first. He wasn't there. She walked to the cabin door and knocked. No answer. Panic flared. She walked around to the back of the cabin. And there he was. Wyatt was chopping wood. He was in his shirt sleeves, the axe rising and falling with a rhythmic thud. He looked the same. Rugged, strong, alone. He must have felt eyes on him, because he stopped mid. He turned slowly. When he saw her, the axe slipped from his hand and hit the ground with a dull clud. He stood frozen, staring at her as if she were a ghost. Sophia, he whispered. She smiled, tears prickling her eyes. Hello, Wyatt. He walked toward her, slowly at first, as if afraid she might disappear. Then he was striding, closing the distance. What are you doing here? He asked, stopping a foot away from her. Your job. New York, .. Get S, she said. I left it all. Why? He asked, his voice rough. Because you were wrong, she said, stepping closer. You said I belonged in the city. You said I'd go crazy in the quiet. But the only time I've felt sane, the only time I've felt alive ... was when I was here, with you. Wyatt looked at her, searching for any sign of hesitation. Found. None. The walls he had built around his heart, the walls he had reinforced for years, crumbled into dust. I thought I'd never see you again, he admitted, his voice cracking. I looked for you in every sunset. I heard your voice in the wind. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to leave. Wyatt didn't speak. He reached out, his hands trembling slightly, and cupped her face. This time, there was no crashing noise to interrupt them. This time, there was only the sound of the wind in the trees and the beating of their hearts. He kissed her. It was a kiss of desperation, of longing, of a promise finally kept. It tasted of wood smoke and hope. Sophia wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tight, knowing she had finally found the one thing she couldn't build in New York. She had found a foundation that wouldn't shift. Wyatt pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. It's a hard life out here, Sophia. It's not a vacation. I know, she said, smiling up at him. I've got boots this time, and I know how to mend a fence. Wyatt laughed, a deep, genuine sound that echoed off the mountains. He scooped her up in his arms, just like he had that first night in the storm. But this time he wasn't carrying a stranger. He was carrying his future. Welcome home, Sophia, he said, and as he carried her toward the cabin, the sun dipped below the peaks of the Tetons, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire, promising a tomorrow that was bright and wild and theirs. Would you like me to write a sequel script where they face their first summer cattle drive together, or switch to story type B for the next episode?